run through the pitch deck first.
Okay.
And then how you're putting that pitch deck to the reality using OKR. Maybe that's a good sequence is what I would believe on.
Okay, fair enough. So let me open the most recent pitch deck. I'll share my screen in a few seconds.
So Schwark, maybe you can view this as like an investment being pitched to you, right? I think that way you'll also get a stress test done.
Sounds good.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay. So the context is that we have data growing at a much faster pace than analytics, at a much faster pace than BI. In other words, we're throwing away a significant portion and an increasingly significant portion of the data we're collecting. And that's a gap we want to bridge, not the data sourcing part, but what does it take for people to understand analyzed data, the consumption angle, which is progressing at a significantly slower pace than data itself. I'll just keep going, but do stop me at any point. You probably read faster than I can talk. So, and the way we want to do this is by delivering insights as data stories, as custom-built vertical solutions. And this is on top of our platform. An insight has a specific meaning to us. It's big, useful, and surprising. Stories are memorable and viral. And this, when it intersects with data, is the business that we're in. And we deliver this through a platform that has a collection of components, the aim of which is to deliver pretty much any verticalized solution in a day. And that speed, and therefore the resulting cost advantage, makes a set of things possible that were otherwise impractical. Therefore, it's not a cost game, but it's lowering the effort to the point where the impractical becomes realistic.
Got it.
The reason we see this as having a large market is because over 5/6 of an enterprise budget in the data space is actually going into building custom solutions, as opposed to only a sixth that's going on to working on existing platforms. And this is, of course, slow, expensive, but importantly requires multiple specialized skills, which is an issue. And there isn't a solution that caters to this because on the one hand, we have tools that are fast, or we have languages that are flexible. And the space that's emerging is the low-code platform space, which is bridging this gap. But there isn't a low-code platform for data solutions, which is where Gramener fits. And we've seen in engagements that we've worked on, let's take with US cold storage, for example, where an engagement where the client has said this is something that's going to take us a month, took us 4 days, and got done in 230 lines of code. Or at Dr. Reddy's, where the client said this is going to take us a month, we got it done in a day, and that was entirely done in about 200 lines of code, and so on. Or in the case of World Bank, they said here's something we just cannot do at all, and that took 5 days. So these are real life scenarios where Gramener has had a reduction in effort, and that's 5 to 25 times because it has, because I missed somewhere, but that's coming up a little bit later. I'll talk about how Gramener does this bit in a bit.
The one thing I would tell you is you kind of think about pitching the business. The more efficient dev cycle is not a compelling pitch.
Interesting.
Meaning, what you really want to be talking about is kind of somewhat of a, let me put it this way. When you tell someone, hey, this will cost my customer less to do with my platform, those are generally not great businesses, right? What are better businesses are ones that make things that weren't possible before possible today. So it is less about, hey, it is cheaper, so I use less people to do it with this versus not. Because at the end of the day, it's a bigger question of was something not possible before that's possible today, or are you creating some kind of tangible top line improvement for your customer, right? So the way you might do it is the way you're describing it, right? But I think what you want to rephrase it, you probably want to rephrase your benefit to your customer. From going from whatever, 4 days to something or whatever, to kind of talk about that they were somehow able to, because of this, change some outcome, right? Meaning this particular dashboard that you now created in 4 days enable them to kind of, I don't know, optimize some supply chain or something, right? So that, and that saved them $100 million, right? So to me, those are the better ways to kind of talk about it. To say, look, by the way, the part of how you want to pitch this is more around, look, if it was going to take 4 weeks or 3 months or whatever, this is a project that needs to be scheduled, right? It needs to be done somewhere. It needs to get budget. It needs to kind of like, it's not that it can be done, it can be done. It's just that like you have all these, normal stuff that happens in a large company that's to do a 3 or 4 month project. Now, if it's a 4-day thing, it's a whole nother equation, right? So suddenly what wasn't possible to do, not because it was, too hard, but just, the normal things of budgeting and prioritization, you've taken that out and therefore enable them to do something, right? So I would focus a little bit more on that top line impact.
Good point. Agreed. This is the second time I'm hearing that. Fully agreed. Let's reword this. The audience that we're targeting for this is the chief data officer or the chief analytics officer. And for them, the intent is, can I create something that makes my custom development more effective? I was going to say efficient, but I think effective is where we want to go towards. The way we do that is, or why we are doing that, is because we work on a series of custom engagements on top of our platform, build the capability that goes into specific products that we create for clients. So, for example, BioNews is something we created for Bark in the media space that they in turn sell to pretty much every news media client in India. The experience from which gets distilled into the platform, which is what captures everything that we know about data solution building into one single solution, on top of which more such products can be built, or more such custom services can be built. That's what we do with the likes of Dell, Novartis, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so on. The space we're competing in.
Two points on that slide. One is when you say you sell to chief data officers, that's by definition denotes a top-down sale. So you want to make sure that you're clear that that is how you're trying to sell your product. If you, in fact, at least the last time we talked, I thought you were doing something around trying to provide an open source or a free tool that is easy to adopt, and then as they grow their usage, you want them to get into a paid, product. That is kind of like the reverse of selling to a chief data officer and chief analytics officer, right? So there you're selling, you ultimately might get budget from these guys, but really the ones you're selling to are the data analysts, if you may, right? So you're basically selling to the end of that chain, helping make their lives faster and easier, and that in doing so are getting introduced to the businesses, right? So that eventually you get paid by a data division, but you're really catering to more the analyst rather than the chief data officer, right? So you might want to, there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just saying you should want to be consistent in your story when you tell it.
That's true. And let's talk a bit about that. The users are more at the analyst level. I'd probably call them the citizen developer. And the open source version aims to make sure that there is a bottom-up pressure. The reality is that over the last 2 years, we still haven't really gotten the kind of traction on the open source side, that not even put in the kind of effort that we should on the open source side, to the point where we have less than 200 users, monthly active users in any month. And on the other hand, our enterprise sales engine is pretty effective. And works top down to get the platform in as part of typically a service or a product. So it's really an embedded platform. People aren't really buying the platform for the value of the platform, they're buying platform for the value of what we deliver on top of it. So from here, this paints a more realistic picture in that the bulk of the sales is happening top down. The latter, which is the open source bottom up adoption, is how we hope to get scale. It isn't something that we've succeeded in yet. So, what I think you're saying is make up your mind. If you want to go that way, just hit that hard. Or if you want to go this way, stick to it. Just a fair point.
Well, more importantly, I'm just saying, just make sure that you're not providing a mixed message, right? Which is, it's perfectly fine to say, look, the model that's working for us is top down. In fact, I'm on the board of another developer tooling company, which actually really loved the bottoms up sales model, which, by the way, most VCs love a bottoms up sales model, even though, funnily enough, in my experience, it's never really worked, right? In most cases, at best, it could work as a sales pipeline tool, right? Which is your sales guys know who to call because, somebody is starting to use it, for free. But for the most part, any company that's really built a big business out of it has almost kind of done a more of a top-down type thing. There's been very few cases where a true, bottoms-up sales model is actually scaled. Very few, right? In spite of that, VCs generally love bottoms-up sales models because they think it's new and it's therefore differentiated. But at least the most successful companies I've seen have all done really good top-down. So my feedback to my company was always like, look, don't try to be a bottoms-up sales company because you feel like it's sexy. Do what's working for you, right? And if top-down is the one that's working for you, then just double down on it. Because look, ultimately, at the end of the day, VCs, customers, nothing succeeds like success, right? Meaning that if you have revenue, nobody really cares how you're doing it, right? They just want to look at your sales growth level rates and say, wow, that's great. That's awesome. I want to be an investor in this company. It has less to do with, hey, is this a bottoms up or a top down sales thing? If you have the numbers. Now, if you don't have the numbers, that's when, the sexiness can help a little bit, right? So.
That point. No, true. In any case, it's the open source edition is not going to get us any revenue. And the hope is that it will convert to enterprise. But even then, it will have to be go up to the top and then drill it down to kind of a sale, which this aligns with. So fair enough.
Well, the other thing I'd say on this slide is this 100 clients or 35 are active. That, is probably less, impressive than it might sound. So I would actually either take out the 35 active in 2020 or just say we have 35 active clients, right? So putting both those numbers there just makes me wonder, does that mean that you're only retaining 30% of your base, right? So that means 70% is churning out, right? So then that's now I understand that, when you have more of a services type business, then, these are the ones that are currently active, but you have a lot of other people that have actually deployed your platform, right? That may not be using services or therefore not be paying you for it, right? That's where it comes down to actually making sure that when you exit a customer, you always leave behind some platform as a service revenue, right? So you are no longer maybe getting any services revenue, but you're going to, from each one of those customers, you're always going to continue to have an infinite lifetime of platform revenue, right?
See, one thing which is driving our conversation, at least the mindset today, Schwark, maybe you could help us to declutter this, right? See, today we are grown as a consulting and services, and that's predominant revenue. But we believe there is definitely a merit in the platform. One, that platform has improved over a period of time. And obviously getting a PaaS or a SaaS revenue is sexy and high valued. So definitely want to go there. So the choice is, as you can earlier illustrated, we give away services, focus heavy on doubling down on PaaS revenue, which is very not so significant today. That's a major risk we are betting on, right? Instead of it, the approach we're taken is we'll still continue our services, but the proportion of services is going to reduce. The PaaS and SaaS revenue will increase over a period of time. So maybe we're trying to communicate that aspect in this slide and across the pitch deck, right? So do you think that works better, or is it the same way we should do, or more give a futuristic view in the pitch deck? Just want to kind of hear on those thoughts, Schwark, if I were
Yeah, by the way, I think what you just said to me is not clear from the deck so far, at least. Okay. Right? Now, I know it because I've had many conversations with you guys, but that the presentation that you're making is not making that very clear, right? So the simplest way to present that when there's a transition is to show a chart that is a kind of like a time-based chart that actually shows proportion of revenue migrating over time, right? And it's perfectly fine. Like, for example, you told me like 20% of your revenue right now is coming from license revenue, right? Which is, by the way, quite impressive if you remember that your company was 100%, services revenue, right? When you started. So you've now gone from 100% services to 20% platform, which is great. So now the question is, okay, is that transition, if that transition took, 3 years, let's say, right? Is the next year going to add another 20%, or is it going to add another 8%, right? So that's the question that I think people have, is like the transition. By the way, I personally think that, again, VCs don't generally love the companies that move from services to products, right? Because they have never really seen that work. To be honest, I have not seen that work very often as well. But I think I mentioned, Narshi's company last time, right, when we talked to you. He's done a phenomenal job of it, right? I mean, he took a company from 100% services. He used that money to fund all of his product development and then started selling more and more product, and then eventually transitioned completely to product. I mean, he of course has services just to kind of get the product implemented and successful, so to speak, right? But it's a lot more of a product company, and he's sitting at $1 billion+ valuation right now because he got, by the way, his first round he raised was from a growth equity guy when he was doing $25 million in revenue, right? And he was in the middle of the transition at that time. So meaning that I think he had half and half or something like that of revenue from products and services. But the growth equity guy was able to see that transition and actually believe it. Whereas an early stage venture guy like myself is less likely to buy into that story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if you remember that, I think you should focus on building the business and do it very capital efficiently, like you've already done, right? So take the services revenue, build the product out. The core thing I think you probably need to really, and you said something that I don't know if I fully think is necessary. You said give away services and make money on things. You don't need to give away services at all, right? You can make money on services. But the problem with services is that it doesn't scale very well, meaning that you have to become a company the size of Infosys with 6 million employees in order to drive revenues, or you have the revenue margins will never be 70-80%. If you can create a 30-40% revenue margin business, that's a good outcome if you're a services company, right? So for all those reasons, they're valued differently, et cetera, right? Which is why most VCs don't love the idea. The important question, though, for you is keeping, 20, 30, 40% of your revenue coming in through services at a 20, 30% margin is not the end of the world. The bigger question is the services an end in itself? Or is it, an enabler to the sale of your product, right? Which is, if I'm spending my services revenue, almost like your customer is paying you to sell it to them, that's how you want to think about your services revenue, right? Which is they're literally they're spending money to help you sell your product to them, which basically means your services can't stand on its own ever. Right? It should always be thought of as an enabler to the selling of a product to that customer.
Exactly.
So if you don't leave the customer with a product at the end of the day, then you've just wasted a bunch of, you've a wasted opportunity, right? Because then you still have your 20-30% margin revenue you got, but it's not helping you build your business in any way. Right?
Yeah. Agree.
Go ahead, Naveen.
That's you're speaking on mute.
Sorry,
Yeah, sorry.
just saying. Shall I go ahead? But no, got you. That's very relevant to us. Let me move on. On the competition side, there are two parts to it. One is on the platform side, where we compete mostly with low code and data platforms. On the services side, the competition is very different. The consulting side and the services side. On the one hand, this is a disadvantage. We get hit on both areas. On the other hand, there aren't many players that can draw from the services side and feed that experience into the platform. So for us, what's a drag is also a source of an advantage. Personally, hard for us to say what beats what, but that's where it
So
is.
here's what I would tell you. Tell a story, right? I mean, don't report on the current status. Talk about the story or how you're thinking about it. So, for example, if ultimately your goal is to have your license revenues be a big chunk of your revenue, that's your ultimate goal, then at the end of the day, while you are very well known for services and that helps you get your product in the door in all the places it gets in, it is simply that it's a foot in the door, right? So at the end of the day, if you can get your product out into enough hands, at some point you probably care less about being the entity that actually gets it in the door of all those people. So at some point, it may be in your interest to have a PwC be your implementation partner, so to speak, right? Where, because you don't care about the services revenue quite as much. Like, it's only 20 or 30% margin for you to start with. If you kind of took that 20% down to 5% margin because PwC is your implementation partner, it's not the end of the world. Like, you don't really care that much. What matters more is that, that you have to basically make sure that PwC now gives you leverage for foot in the door. So instead of you're trying to sell your services to get the foot in the door, PwC is already in all these doors, and they can possibly sell them the services and your software along with it. That's great, right? So I would tell you that kind of figure out a way to kind of manage that story and that transition and how that's going or what you're trying to do there, even if you're not there yet, right? Just tell the story of how you see that world moving in this thing. Because the way you're presenting it makes me feel like, oh, this is a problem, right?
Understood.
I would kind of turn it around, talk about like, wait, here's where we compete with one side, we compete with the other side. We want to continue to compete with everything on the left here, but over time we're probably not going to compete as much on the right. We're simply doing all of that because we have a reputation there. So we'll, at some point, it may actually be in your best interest, by the way, to spin off your services business, sell it to a Deloitte, for example, and make them a preferred partner, right? So then you would get some capital into the company, so you will get more funding, and you get a distribution partner of scale, right? So that actually gives you the ability to do something more interesting. But you can't do that till you've established a sales model that sells a platform license with every services engagement you get into.
Yeah.
Once you've figured that out, once you've established that pattern and that pace, then the services becomes less important.
Agreed. Very
right?
true. Got you on this. Let's talk about how it works and the reason why it accelerates the development. So firstly, it's a collection of pre-built components, and these are the most commonly used components as part of any data application. And these are exposed as A, microservices, and B, that are pretty easy to deploy. What that means is they're pretty interoperable, easy to mix and match, not just internally within Gramix, but across any enterprise architecture. And it's pretty quick to learn. The idea is that we don't want people to leverage new skills and That's effectively taking it down to the basics, fundamental standards. Just stick to HTTP, stick to REST, pure Python, pure JavaScript. Nothing more to learn than that. But in order to get, I mean, you don't even need to get that far. It's usually just configuration that you use to create anything. The flexibility comes from the fact that you can use these standards. The speed comes from the fact that you don't need to use these standards. And that's what ends up getting what's typically a few thousand lines of code down to a few hundred lines of code.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the mix of businesses, services, software, that is the products themselves, and the platform, this is how it's been going. And 2019 was at a 12%. We dipped in 2020 to a 3, and 2021 this year will be ending at back at a 9%. And this is mainly because of the renewed focus on the platform for last year. The idea again is that the services help us create products rapidly, and now we're planning to monetize these products rapidly. Earlier, these products were effectively clients' products, so this was effectively bundled into the services. But now we're spinning off these as products that we ourselves sell instead of just our clients. And that apart, the platform, of course, continues to learn from that. Within an account, it's the land and expand strategy. Enter the account, mine across horizontally. Across geographies, it's North America and Asia Pacific at the moment, and here are 4 verticals that we're focused on. From a marketing perspective, the intent is to showcase the case studies in terms of what we've done as work with clients, A, with the intent that it creates interest in specific areas, but also helps people see real success stories than pure platform capabilities.
I think, again, this story with the numbers here almost shows that you're having trouble moving to the platform as a service revenue line. So I would actually take a step back from the pitch deck and actually just focus on like what is really going on. How do you tell the story, right? Because to me, the move from platform to services could be as simple as a slightly different pricing model, right? Which is you tell your customer, look, whatever, you could tell them it's 9K a month, I need 15 people, so I'm going to do this or whatever, etc., right? Or you can say, look, it's going to cost you roughly the same amount, but here's how the pricing works, right? We'll throw in X amount of services for this kind of license fee, right? The big difference for your customer is actually in year 2 and year 3, right? Which is there will be a residual license fee that they will have to continue to pay you in order to do something. Now, this is important because for your customer, they should be able to move that license fee from something else they're paying for today. Let's say they're paying for Tableau. They should be able to take 2 or 3, 4 seats out of their Tableau spend out because they don't need it anymore, right? If they cannot do that, then you have a real problem because you can never be a software solution if you are not kind of replacing something else that they have to spend money to get otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like if this is a no spend area and you're asking them to create brand new spend to do something, that's a much harder sale. It can be done, by the way. And when it's done, it becomes a phenomenal success. Like Looker ended up creating a platform that was effectively a development tool for data analysts, right? So it didn't do the stuff, it didn't do the data, it didn't do the visualization, but it actually helped them build. They created a whole new language. They actually asked all those people to learn that new language. But they said, hey, if you learn my language, it'll actually make it easier for you to build out all these dashboards, right? Now, that's a massively painful sell because you're actually creating a whole new layer of technology in a stack and asking people to buy it. But if you win at it, you get a massive success, right? But I would not recommend that to most people. What I'd simply tell you in most cases is try to figure out what kind of spend you can take out from their existing commitments and that can leave it to you. If you cannot do that, by the way, I think you'll always have trouble selling your product in, because it's a question of like, where is this budget going to come from in year 2 and year 3? Because I can spend to implement it this year, but if I have to have a license fee that spans multiple years, how do I pay for it? And the simplest answer to that is, well, you don't have to pay for this other tool that you would have otherwise had to do with or without us, right? And so, and at that point, you're simply kind of refactoring your existing revenue pricing differently. And so you shouldn't have your numbers become 3 and 97 to 9 and 89. You should be able to go from 3 and 97 to, 15 and 85, or 20 and 80 or something like that, because you're going to get, the way you should think about this is there's going to be 1 in 5 customers that'll say yes to this, and 3 and 5 that are not going to be quite ready yet. But if I can get 1 in 5 to do it, the next year I should be able to tell the rest of them, look, 1 in 5 did it and they're so happy right now, right? So then one more 1 in 5 will do it. And so you should actually go from 20% to 40% of your revenue in year 2, or so on and so forth, right? So my point is, that's kind of how I would think about this transition, at least as presented. It makes me feel like something isn't working. So this will always be a services company, right?
Got you. Fair point. That's the team, and mostly ex-IBMers. 7, 8 directors and the management team, and we are starting off an industry council where we're looping in people, mostly clients, well-wishers, who can help us get kick-started on the growth strategy from a domain perspective in particular.
Makes sense.
The numbers, I'll just put that out there for you to take a look at. Let me know when you're ready.
Are these all USD?
These are USD, yes.
Okay.
Good point. We should make that a little more prominent.
Got it. Well, I think the important thing here is, again, this will again show that it's hard to scale a services business, right? So, but you can see that again, 21 to 22, you're showing a roughly 50% increase. So that is the kind of thing that people will find interesting. The stuff before that is exactly what I'd expect to find in a situation like this,
On the services side, right? Fair enough.
Yeah.
True. And 2022 is ambitious, so we'll see.
Generally, in this pitch decks, Schwark, is there a merit in showing from 19 onwards, or start off from, what do you expect? Like, can we start off from 20 onwards and then go until next 2 years projections? Is that a good thing to do? Because we are more showing a future state as opposed to the past, right?
So here's the thing. At the end of the day, there is no investor that will ever invest in you without understanding your business very well, right?
Yeah.
So at some point, they're going to want to learn all of this. Now the parts that I don't think you have to show, at least in your first presentation, is the other 3 tables on this deck, right? Mm-hmm. Your cash flow, your balance sheet, your cap table, all of those things can come, in a follow-up meeting. You don't really have to show any of that right now, right? They will want to know all these things, but they typically, you might want to look at all of that stuff as like a diligence item at some point in the future, right? Yeah. But this revenue chart is something everybody wants to look at. They want to look at what your margins look like. They do want to look at what your revenue looks like and how that's changing. So the way I would focus on is less about whether or not you show it, but really how do you tell the story, right? Again, it's all about trying to figure out a storyline that you tell that the data somehow fits to, right? And that story needs to be compelling. And that story needs to have some evidence points that people can buy into, right? So that says, okay, if you're telling the story that I'm moving from A to B, have you shown you can move from A to B, right? Have you shown any proof point that is even possible, right? Now, what I would tell you from everything I've seen so far is that any kind of story you tell just does not have enough evidence points yet for somebody to buy, right? And so I would argue that you want to focus on building out that change. And what I would tell you is think of 2021 more aggressively, right? So if you've set a goal for your team to get to 9%, basically you need to kind of rethink that and say, no, I need to get to 20%. Now, you may not get to 20%, right? But your team needs to try and get you as close to 20% as possible, right? You could still give them their bonuses if they hit 15%, for example, right? But their goals are to get to 20, right? Anyway, I think my point to you is like, just think about this, think about pushing it farther, and what needs to fundamentally change. So that's what I would ask you guys to go think about, right? It's just like the pace at which you're moving and thinking about this. Now, I understand, by the way, certain things are just not going to be acceptable to your customers. The question is, how do you make it work for your customers? Like, how do you actually make this transition work for them? Like, how will it make sense for them? That's why I keep saying you have to figure out which budget line item that you're taking away for them that you can take more of. Because at the end of the day, there is no new money that will get created by the data division, right? The chief data officer just doesn't have a bigger budget because they have the project that uses you that needs to get done. They still have to get everything done with the money they already have. So the simplest way is to walk in there and say, look, you're going to spend, I don't know, 20% more next year on Tableau licenses or Looker licenses or something else. You don't need those anymore, right? When you use our platform for this project, you won't need those anymore at all. By the way, and therefore I'm going to take half of that cost in my license fee, right? So that whatever you're going to spend on Tableau licenses, we only cost half that much, but that's what you're going to be paying for the next, 4 or 5 years or whatever, however long you use this tool, right?
Got it.
And then you have to translate that into, your sales commissions targets need to be set appropriately, right? So that they actually are all incented to sell a certain level of license revenue, not just services, right? And again, give them flexibility early on, right? That maybe you take a little bit of a hit on margin on services in order to get more license revenue, right? And that's okay. As long as your customers are starting to think about, I need to spend this much money on an ongoing basis and this much money on services, right?
Yeah. Perfect sense. Yeah.
Cool. And the ask was for 12 mil. The intent is to spend that on platform development, primarily in sales and marketing is the two biggest areas, expand into global markets, and also non-linear growth.
In this case, are you saying that your $12 million raise will get you up to $75 million of revenue in 2025?
No. We are further saying that's a jump start from a growth standpoint, Schwark.
So I think the way most of these things need to be phrased is what you're looking to raise.
Okay.
And generally, where does that take you? That raise, right? Now you may have plans beyond that and all the other stuff. But the question is, think about it this way. As an investor, when I get into a company, that now becomes my problem to keep this company funded. Because I already put money into it. I'm an investor. I can't keep putting more money of my own money into it. My LPs will want to see somebody else price that company to figure out what it's worth the next time around. So somebody else needs to invest in the next round. And where you're going to be at the point where you pretty much need to raise again is very important to me. Because I have to figure out whether at that point, is that an attractive investment opportunity or not for the next investor? Because if you take 12 million and you take your revenue from, call it whatever, $12 million or $9 million to $14 million, and that's what your $12 million buys you. I'm not saying it does, but let's say it does. I'd be sitting there saying, there's no way somebody else is going to fund that company at that point. So it doesn't matter what you're raising, where you're going to take the company with that raise is just not interesting enough for me to kind of jump in now, right? Now, on the other hand, which is also not true, but if you said, hey, with $12 million, I can drive $77 million of revenue with 50% of SaaS revenue as part of that, I would totally do it, right? Because then I'd say, hey, that's easily fundable at that time at a step up. So that's something that I could possibly evaluate, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important to not pick a goal of 2025, but really think about how long will 12 million last you with the plans you have in place, and where will the company be at that point, right?
Yeah. So more show primarily what is 12 million taking to what point, right? I think that is where
that's right. So it's less important what you want to spend your money on. That's a nice to have. I mean, it's great to know where you want to spend your money, but what you really want to care about is what does that buy you, right? So you spend $12 million, what do I get, right? So where is the company going to be at the end of it? In revenue, in your transition to SaaS revenue, all those core metrics that you've talked about all deck, you want to find out and say, okay, if you gave me $12 million, here's what I can actually deliver back, right? And that's the point at which we are going to raise again, right? So when I've delivered this, we can raise again.
Got you. Cool. I think that pretty much covers this deck. Are there any elements that you felt were not in the deck that would be useful or important from an investor perspective?
No, I think, by the way, I would just do some refinements. Like, for example, you have a lot of co-founders, you have a lot of people. I would just take, I would kind of slim it down a little bit, highlight the top 2 or 3 people in the company and their backgrounds a little bit more, talk about, so you almost want to have a founder slide that kind of highlights the key people and then also mentions a whole bunch, the bench strength, you know what I mean? Like everybody else, right? And say, by the way, these are the key people, but by the way, we have 20 other people that, these are all the people with, certain kinds of titles or experience in data science or IBM or whatever else you want to highlight. So kind of split it out into key people, an in-depth background on each of them and their roles, right? Those should definitely be, like CEO, COO, CFO, or something like that, if those are the people that are there, or CEO, COO, chief data scientist, or whatever. Like pick 2 or 3, the core people that you want to highlight as the founders, the management, and then talk about the bench strength, saying, okay, these people are backed up by a lot of other people, right? So we have a lot more strength. This is the depth of our strength, right? The other thing I would do is, just highlight the transition a lot more, like the slide, 8, I guess, where you have your, the revenue transition. This is the core of the story. So you want to highlight that and you want to explain that, like, you want to talk through that. And this is where you might actually want to have maybe more years on the outer years rather than stop at 2021, right? And say, like, what is 2022 going to look like? What do you want 2023 to look like? Like, because if the transition is still ongoing, you want to show what that's going to look like, right?
Yeah. I think lead is still that, whatever the 40-50% what we're talking about, right? Next 4 years. I think if you can show that that's a transition, that will be good. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And by the way, the 2021 for us is the March closures, Schwark. So that is this today, March 31st, will close with around 11%.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like, I think the way you should think about it is then if your financial years are March to March, then really 2021 or calendar 2021 is really part of your 2022 year, right? So, and so then you definitely have to talk about what 2022 looks like, right? So you have to talk about what 2023 looks like and so on.
Yeah. Because at least the current way, how visible you look at it, I think 20%, 22, 24% looks practically feasible for the coming year. That is the 2022 March.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we should build that story. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
I also want to go into OKRs, but there's no way we'll have time for that. So let's maybe just, if there are any last thoughts or comments, Naveen, we'll take that and wrap it up with that.
Just one point, I mean, more short, because we are pitching to more a growth equity or a strategic investor as opposed to a venture capitalist, right? So more any of the key aspects which we need to keep as a difference of the way how you view a lens from a VC standpoint versus growth equity. Because I know a few of them you covered in your conversation, but
See,
talk
the
about it.
thing that matters a lot more to growth equity type folks than to VCs are financials. So they will care a lot about cash flows. They'll care about, EBITDA. So if you are talking to more growth equity strategic type folks, well, actually strategic folks actually don't care about anything almost. The only thing they really care about is, hey, is there some optionality for us to kind of maybe buy this company at some future stage or something like that? So they're generally very valuation insensitive. They don't really care how much. What they probably do care a little bit about is how much you want to raise, because different strategics have different kinds of budgetary limits on what they can probably invest in any one company. So that's the kind of stuff that's probably more important to a strategic than anything else. Growth equity guys care a lot about the financials. So you want to have multiple slides on the deep dive on the financials itself, right? Not just that high level that shows here's my revenue, my EBIT, et cetera, but you probably want to kind of get into a little bit more depth, like what's in COGS, how much is your gross margins, how are your what is EBITDA, and why is it what that number looks like, right? What are the kind of cash flows? Like, are you generating cash? Are you consuming cash? If you're generating cash, how much are you generating? If you're consuming cash, how much are you consuming? So those kinds of metrics are going to be the core drivers of a growth equity investor's calculus, right? So they will care less about, PaaS versus SaaS and all these other kinds of things. So for example, if you're growing 20, 30% a year, at a certain, gross margin, percentage, they will have a formulaic level of their level of interest, right? That says, okay, they will know exactly what they are willing to pay for a company that's generating X million dollars at Y% gross margin, growing at Z%, right? They have a calculator on the back end somewhere that they can punch those numbers in and say, okay, here's what we're going to do, right? And so those kinds of things, growth equity is very much based on the numbers, not based on the story.
Okay. Yeah.
Got you. Thanks a lot for your time, Sri. That was very helpful, more than very helpful. And we'll revise it. I'll send you a version, but probably won't trouble you for a while now. Maybe give it a quarter or two and get back to you, hopefully when we've progressed on this, and would love to keep you posted on where we are.
Oh, of course. Sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Take care. Get
All
well
right.
soon.
See you guys.
Bye.
Yeah. Take care, Schwark. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks.